She saved a creature, but it held the mind of a fallen alien queen. Echelon 9 uncovered. We float in the cold silence of dead steel and ghost echoes, where breathing too loudly feels like an insult to the ghosts of genius who once worked here. Echelon 9, the final assignment of the disgraced. The station orbits nothing suspended between stars like a forgotten thought. Here Kelmoran examines decomposed Psi organic culture dishes while half listening to an antique jazz record looping endlessly on analog speakers. Nothing about this place should matter anymore. And yet today it does. Because today Kale finds something that should not exist. He had been descending through Sector Theta intending to strip defunct bioscanners for parts. Instead he discovered the chamber's wall scorched inward, not out like something entered rather than escaped. The sensors were fried, the local gravity dampeners flickering like a haunted chandelier, and in the center of the room lay a mass of pulsing membranous tissue curled in on itself like an animal in pain. It glowed faintly, its pulses syncopated not with a heartbeat but with thought, a thing thinking about its own death. Kel should have called it in, but exile warps instincts and curiosity doesn't die quietly. So instead he retrieved it, wrapped in sterile field bandages and Psi-damp foam. The creature, if it could be called that, had no limbs, no eyes. But Kyle could feel it watching him, not visually but from within. An awareness probing, cautious, familiar. He placed it in the isolation chamber. 3 hours later, the chamber's biometric sensors shorted out in a pattern matching human REM sleep. 3 more, and the intercom whispered in a voice Kale never recorded. "Kale, thank you." He froze. Not because it spoke, but because the voice was female. Calm, tired, and unmistakably Devarian. That night, as Kale studied the creature's biostructure, neither cell-based nor digital, but something psi-emergent, he noticed it twitch when he hovered near its central cortex. Not in pain, in anticipation. He reached for the neural interface usually used for symbiotic mapping in low-order test organisms. It wasn't designed for something like this, but exile is where one improvises. The moment the link activated, his thoughts cracked open like overripe fruit. Images, a throne of glass fracturing from within. A child fleeing through hallways that bent away from her steps. Laughter, screams, silence made of light. Then he saw her, or rather her memory of herself. Seren Valis. He didn't know the name, but he felt it, echoing through neurons not his own. And as if in answer, the creature stirred in its chamber and coiled softly against the glass, its psi emission, forming a shape that translated via Kale's interface, meant a single concept: home. Kyle barely slept. He spent the next day tracing biochemical routes through psi channel harmonics. The creature, he now labeled it Solis, was neither host nor parasite. Its structure suggested it had been intentionally cultured, grown from the mind outward, using psi fields as scaffolding. A soul shard, a sliver of someone's consciousness carved off and housed in living tissue. But whose he ran a speculative genealogy trace, feeding in harmonics from Solis's thought patterns and overlaying them against known ESI architecture templates. The result, 78% alignment with Devarian royalty class brainstem resonance patterns. Kale didn't curse often, but when the match was confirmed, he whispered, "Well, damn me twice." He was holding a living fragment of someone who shouldn't exist anymore, or at least, someone powerful enough to pretend they didn't. That night, he dared a deeper link. Solis didn't resist. This time the interface didn't burn out. It sang. He saw planets upside down in crystal matrices, felt the first kiss of oxygen through juvenile lungs in a palace garden, laughed at a joke told by someone faceless but warm. Then fire. A station on fire. Screaming. Being split like cutting memory with a scalpel. Kyle awoke, slumped beside the chamber. Solis was pressed gently against the glass, humming softly in psi rhythm. He didn't speak, just nodded. They weren't alone anymore. And if this creature was what he thought it was, he'd just lit a match inside a warehouse full of psychic dynamite. You won't be able to stop being curious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Kale didn't realize it at the time, but the second link changed everything. The initial contact had been chaotic, like catching falling glass in your bare hands. But the next one, it was deliberate. and Solus wanted it. He spent that morning rebuilding the interface, adding older Earth-designed redundancies and a little side-channel buffering he'd hacked together using leftover Devarian interface gel. Primitive, yes, but reliable. There was something comforting about using Earth tech. It didn't pretend to know your thoughts. It just asked what wire went where. Solus responded before he even initiated the full bridge. Its cortical cluster pulsed in anticipation, and Cal felt the hum build from his fingertips up his spine. When the link opened, it was less like stepping into someone's dream and more like being invited into a memory, as if the creature had been waiting to share it. He saw Seren again, not in pain this time, but young, so young, standing on a balcony of moving marble as a sunrise bent the horizon like liquid gold. Around her, thousands of minds whispered in harmony, not speech, not sound, but ideas, feelings, unity. And at the center of that lattice of connection was her, queen in exile, host to billions. Then snap. That unity vanished. She turned alone now, hair disheveled, eyes wild, holding a small glass sphere, barely breathing. The sphere pulsed with the same cadence as Solus. Kyle reeled back, gasping, pulling the wet interface leads from his temples. "You're her," he murmured aloud, or part of her. Solus curled in response, its psi wave tightening to a soft, sorrowful thrum. Kyle didn't need translation. Yes, a part. He ran both hands through his hair and sank onto the floor beside the chamber. Echelon 9 creaked around them like an old ship remembering how to dream. He stared through the reinforced glass and found himself talking before he knew why. "You're scared. You shouldn't be here. Neither should I, really. But if they did this to you, whoever they are, they'll come looking." Solus's pulse brightened for a moment. Then Kale felt something new, a question. "Why do you help?" Kale chuckled. "Because I'm not very good at not helping." The station lights flickered. Somewhere deep below, a relay surged. Kyle stood. Time to see how deep this hole goes. He rerouted power to the old command systems. Most of the station's cores were gutted, but the observatory still had enough USI interlink to reach restricted archives if you knew the back doors. Kel, to his eternal shame, had helped design some of them. He pinged the old transcore index. The system resisted, then accepted his hashed credentials with a passive-aggressive chirp. A moment later, files spilled open Echelon 9's final experiment logs. Project name, Valley's Sanction. He read in silence, face-blank, knuckles white on the console. They hadn't just studied psi-linked minds here. They'd harvested them. Specifically, Saren Vallis's Sci-Fi pattern captured during her brief accident aboard a royal diplomatic vessel 2 years ago, an accident that hadn't been an accident. The logs made it clear her consciousness had been fragmented, sectioned into experimental psi organisms to test the feasibility of neural legacy duplication. They called it consciousness sharding and Solus subject Theta 1. Not a pet, not a construct, a stolen soul. Kale turned from the console just as the chamber hissed open. Solus was already emerging, not with urgency but certainty, as if he had known he would need to see that. Its membrane shifted and Kale instinctively knelt. A single pulse, then another. Not sadness, not fear, trust. The door to the station's atrium groaned open a moment later. Kale grabbed his tool pack. He had no plan, but now he had a responsibility. He wasn't alone. Not in exile. Not anymore. That night, the stars outside flickered oddly. Kale chalked it up to the station's failing optics. He was wrong. Across the cosmos, on a moon cloaked in light storms and long-distance Psi haze, a ship the size of a city changed course. Inside it, Seren Vallis awoke from stasis and remembered what she had lost. Kel didn't sleep much after reading the experiment logs. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the images returned, surgical clamps wrapped in psi-dampening foam fragments of Seren's neural schema, reduced to data points, her name tagged like a virus signature. They hadn't just ripped her mind apart, they'd archived it. Solus hovered near the ceiling that night, suspended by an internal psi field. Kyle watched it drift gently in his workshop, its bioluminescence shifting through soft shades of indigo and silver. It wasn't just alive, it was aware, reacting to his emotions, like a mirror, too kind to be honest. "You're getting stronger," he murmured. Solus pulsed in reply, 4 quick flashes. Agreement. Cal sipped recycled coffee that tasted like defeat and stared at the shuttle schematic he'd been modifying in secret. The Edger-class cruiser wasn't designed for stealth flight, but with a few bypasses, maybe a sublayer, PSI disruption matrix scavenged from old biotech dampers. A gentle chime interrupted his thought. The station's long-range sensors. Active. Cal stiffened. Nothing ever tripped those. Not out here. He bolted for the control deck. As he pulled up the interface, his stomach dropped. A vessel civilian class on paper, but its flight signature told a different story. Stealth Field Devarian Crystal Core engines cloaked until the last minute, and descending on Echelon 9 with surgical precision. Of course, he muttered. Of course they'd send her, because the pilot had overridden the station's security handshake in one go. And only one person ever had that level of clearance, Seren Vallis. Kel met her at Docking Bay Theta with a plasma wrench and an apology preloaded in his throat. She stepped through the mist like a ghost wearing royalty long coat, flickering with embedded thread hair, tied back in regulation braids, eyes calculating and tired all at once. So she said without preamble, "You found her." Cale didn't nod, didn't deny it. He just stepped aside. Solus floated behind him like a child waking from a dream. The moment Seren saw it, her posture changed, not with fear, but grief. She exhaled. "They told me she didn't survive," Cale echoed, suddenly unsure. Seren stepped forward. She didn't touch Solus. Just looked at it like you might look at a scar you've hidden for years. Solus was me, or part of me. The part they took when they said I'd be better without fear, without doubt. Cale blinked. "So you cut yourself shattered," she said, voice dry, "to protect my memories, my doubts, my humanity, if you want to call it that. The Psi Council wanted me perfected, unified. And now Seren turned to him. Now I want her back." Solus floated forward tentatively. Their psi fields brushed. Kyle felt it in the air like static laced with tears. But something unexpected happened. Instead of merging, Solus recoiled. Not in fear, in refusal. Seren frowned, eyes narrowing. "She doesn't trust me." Kyle cleared his throat. "Good. Means she takes after you." Seren shot him a look that could disassemble a weaker man, but then her expression softened. "You bonded with her." "She chose me," Cal said, "and I chose to protect her." That earned him a long silence. Then Seren looked around the station. "You know they're coming, right? Court's not subtle. If he knows Solus is active, the Council will send him to clean up." Cal gestured toward the dismantled Psi interface array. "Then we don't wait." Seren raised a brow. "Do you have a plan?" "No," he said, "but I have tools. A half-sane Psi entity, and a growing need to make someone regret underestimating me." A moment passed. Then Seren laughed short and sharp. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we do it right. We go dark, we go far, and we build something they can't control." Cale's eyes drifted to the Iridex route, the only known corridor where Sci-Fi signatures couldn't be traced. It was a wild space where thought echoed across timelines and reality operated on mood swings. Seren followed his gaze. "Iridex 4. It's a long shot. It's home," she said, suddenly soft. Cale looked at Solus. She pulsed once. Agreement. They got to work. By midnight, the jump core hummed like a sleeping dragon. Solus integrated herself into the ship's core like she'd been built for it, and Seren handed Cale an injection of raw psi damp to withstand the fold. He hesitated. "I'm not Devarian," he said. "You don't need to be," she replied. "You're human." As they initiated the Iridex jump, the stars outside twisted into ribbons. Echelon 9 vanished behind them, and the future folded open like a mind learning to scream. Iridex 4 didn't welcome them so much as tolerate their presence. That was its way. The moment they exited, fold space reality itself staggered around them. Stars flickered between past and future gravity, rippled sideways, and Solus let out a harmonic shriek that turned Cale's stomach inside out. Not from pain, she was excited. This was her element. The ship coasted toward the fractured moon of Iridex 4, a jagged sphere shattered long ago by unknown forces and held together now by psi gravity, like a planet tied with invisible strings. Kyle winced as his head throbbed. Already the laws of physics here seemed to ask for identification and a 2-drink minimum. Seren was unfazed. She guided the shuttle toward a crystalline outcropping embedded with psi transmitters that sparkled like a nervous system exposed to the stars. This was a forgotten listening post once used by rogue archivists who studied consciousness itself. Perfect for hiding, perfect for healing. And for the first time since leaving Earth, Kale finally asked aloud, "So what are you really?" Siren was silent for a while. The shuttle settled into a natural alcove formed by tectonic folds like rippling cloth, and when she finally spoke, it was with the weight of someone tired of being a symbol. "I was 12 when they put me into the collective lattice. Too young to question it. Too old to be innocent. My thoughts weren't mine after that, not really. Everything I felt was analyzed, filtered, optimized." She touched the viewport as Solus hovered outside, glowing brighter here, resonating with the very space itself. "I cut myself free, severed the part that is still questioned. The fear, the wonder, the love became her. Solus." Kale turned to her. "And the rest of you became queen." "Not for long," Siren murmured. "The council needed a puppet. I was too wild. They staged a retirement and replaced me with a hive proxy. That's when I came looking for her. She remembers what I lost." Kyle didn't reply immediately. He watched Solus as she wove glowing strands through the cracked air. She wasn't just regaining strength, she was anchoring, drawing on Iridex's dream logic to reform herself. "You know," he said, "on Earth, when a mind fractures, we call it dissociation. It's considered a pathology." Siren gave him a crooked smile. "In Devarian science, it's called evolution. Later, they worked to stabilize the psi lattice of the post, repurposing it into something else. Siren called it a chrysalis chamber. Kyle called it a really dangerous power grid built by ghosts. Either way, it gave Solus the room she needed. Kyle adjusted the neural stabilizers while Siren traced ancient runes into the interface, each symbol glowing briefly before fading. These weren't spells exactly, but they might as well have been. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said, as they recalibrated the chamber's filters. Kale nodded. "I assume you mean more than not dying." Siren sat beside him. Not quite close enough to touch, but not far either. "The Psi Council won't stop. They've enslaved billions by altering the Psi lattice. They don't just suppress dissent, they erase it. Most Avarians don't even know they're prisoners. And you want to undo that. I need to." She looked at him. "But I can't do it alone." Kale was quiet for a moment, then cracked a smile. "I'm a bioengineer, Siren, not a revolutionary. You're both now." It wasn't a demand, just the truth. That night, as they shared a meal cobbled together from survival rations and native Iridex fauna, Kyle insisted the glowing beetles were not a food group. The conversation grew lighter. She laughed at one of his jokes, real laughter, unfiltered, and when she caught him staring, she didn't look away. "This place messes with time," he said softly. "You feel it too, right?" She nodded. "That's why healing happens faster here. Why memory feels like prophecy." "You think we've met before?" Kale hesitated. "I think I loved you the moment I heard your voice in that lab." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, weighted with maybe. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his temple, a gesture from a species that doesn't believe in spoken promises. "You still might." Solus pulsed softly nearby, her light dimmed to a warm amber. Later in the chrysalis chamber, Kyle watched her dissolve into light again, merging with the lattice. Not vanishing, not ending, becoming. The blueprint of their rebellion was taking shape. Not a weapon, not even a virus, but a reminder. Freedom of thought encoded in the language of the mind, and in the cradle of paradox that was Iridex 4, they'd plant it like a seed. The first test of the liberation signal nearly killed them. Or more accurately, nearly fractured them, mind from body, thought from will. Sci-Tech didn't play by Newton's rules out here, especially not when you were trying to rewrite the fundamental architecture of an entire species' collective consciousness. Kel stood barefoot on the lattice floor of the chrysalis chamber, hands trembling as he held the stabilizer core. Siren was across from him, already bleeding light from her psi nodes, a side effect she hadn't warned him about. Solus hovered between them, her glow-flaring tendrils arcing like charged wire. "This is either going to free a quadrant," Kale muttered, "or turn us into existential graffiti." Siren grinned. "Either way, it'll be memorable." The prototype wave generator jury-rigged from salvaged lattice conduits, and Solus's own CSI resonance kicked into life with a sound like someone whispering directly into Kale's pineal gland. Thoughts around him stuttered. Gravity forgot its job for a moment. He bit down on the urge to vomit as Solus projected the raw signal into the chamber. What followed was not silence but inversion, as if all sound had been folded into itself and buried in his bones. Then the chamber collapsed. Not physically but perceptually. Walls turned to questions. Light asked permission to be visible. Kale's heartbeat synced with Serene's breathing, and in a moment that felt like poetry turned into geometry, he saw it. The Psi Liberation Code. Not a virus, not a weapon. A reminder. A bioengineered memory pulse. Crafted to awaken suppressed individual identity within any Devarian host. Serene had encoded it using the part of herself that remembered what fear felt like, and Kale had laced it with human neural stubbornness. They had just created consciousness with a grudge, and it worked. Mostly. Kyle collapsed the moment the signal tapered off. Seren caught him before his head hit the lattice. Note to self, he gasped. Maybe don't test full-scale neuroepiphanies on yourself. She smirked. You survived. Barely. I saw a version of me that majored in finance. That's worse than death. He chuckled, then winced. His spine felt like it had been replaced with a wet antenna. Solus hovered closer, her light a gentle pulse. She was stronger now, not just recovering but changing. Her form was stabilizing into something more definite, more personable. She's adapting, Seren murmured, watching the shimmer of fractal wings forming along Solus's back. She's becoming you again, Kale said. No, Seren corrected softly. She's becoming someone neither of us was allowed to be. They spent the next 2 days refining the signal, compressing its payload, embedding it into bioresonant crystals that could be scattered across Devarian relay nodes. Seren called it a lattice whisper. Kyle preferred consciousness grenade. Whatever the label, it worked. But they had a problem. Court Veyron. The last transmission through the Iridex relay showed a council update. Veyron had been promoted to High Executor of Psi Integrity, a role invented for exactly one purpose: finding Seren. He'll track the CSI disturbances, eventually, Seren said, as she cleaned Psi residue from a stabilizer core. Kyle nodded. Then we need to act before he does. She studied him quietly. You know, if we do this, there's no going back. He paused, then walked over to her, placing a hand lightly on her arm. I've been in exile long enough. Time I picked a side. Their eyes met. No kisses, no grand declaration. Just the quiet, unbearable intimacy of two minds slowly sinking. Seren spoke again, voice soft. When I first fractured, I didn't think anyone would ever choose me again. Not really. Not as I am. Cal offered a tired smile. Then I'm glad I proved you wrong. Outside, Solus unfolded wings of thought and began crafting the final waveform. She sang not with sound but with purpose. A declaration: I am not a fragment. I am what was hidden. That night Kale couldn't sleep, not because of fear but because of clarity. The signal was ready. The final phase loomed. And somewhere beyond the stars, Court Veyron prepared his own. In Virellum Prime, the council stirred. But in Iridex 4, a rebellion was already breathing. The silence before departure tasted like metal and prophecy. Kyle watched the final resonance seed be tucked into its cradle within the shuttle's passé core. Each seed was a beacon, tiny bioengineered truth bombs wrapped in fractal protein and encoded memories. Seren handled them with care that bordered on reverence. Solus coiled around the chamber, her light dimmed, focused inward like she was dreaming in languages no one had spoken for centuries. They were leaving Iridex 4, heading straight into the dragon's mouth. Back to Devarian space. Back to Virellum Prime. The trip would take 12 jumps, assuming Court hadn't laid trap fields across the node grid. He had. Of course he had. The third node nearly cored their navigation AI. Seren rerouted manually barking spatial conversions in tritone Devarian, while Kyle realigned the damping fields mid-jump. We good, he asked, as space folded into something that smelled like burned ozone and envy. Define good, she said without missing a beat. They arrived in orbit above Virellum Prime, masked under a tech relic, an ancient Devarian diplomatic frigate Seren had pulled from some Black Register hangar only ex-royalty would know about. Its systems were archaic, but its Passage Shroud matrix, analog elegant, was perfect. Sometimes the oldest ghosts hide you best. Kyle looked out the viewport. The capital floated like a jewel set in a crown of moving thought. Verulam's skyline was alive, its buildings shifting geometry and rhythm with the collective's mood. It was beautiful in a way that made your teeth ache. It looks peaceful, Kale murmured. It's not, Saren replied. They've mistaken obedience for harmony. She input final approach codes. They were headed straight for the Psi Congress. Once every decade, the Devarian Council summoned their entire species into shared communion, a full-spectrum Psi broadcast that touched every linked mind, reformatting dissent and reinforcing ideological unity. It was propaganda elevated to art. But this time, Seren intended to hijack it. Their infiltration relied on three things: Seren's outdated but still active royal PSI signature, Kale's improvised consciousness decoupler, which resembled a spine crab wearing a monocle, and Solus. Solus had changed. Where once she had flickered like a curious animal, now she moved with intent. Her form was more humanoid, vaguely echoing Seren, but her own thing entirely. Her wings were translucent lattice, her face a mosaic of shifting emotion. As they landed, Solus pressed her forehead gently to Kale's. The sensation was like standing in the center of a hurricane made of childhood memories. She was afraid. He whispered, "It's okay. We'll be with you." The Psi Congress was held in the Hall of Harmonics, a massive amphitheater grown from Psi reactive coral, responsive to the collective's emotional state. As they entered under assumed identities, Kale was struck by the eerie serenity. Thousands of delegates sat in soft, concentric rings, heads bowed, bodies still, waiting for the signal, waiting for command. Court Veyron stood at the apex, wrapped in ceremonial bone light, speaking softly into the lattice stream. His voice was oil in Kyle's ears. Devarian unity is the light in our blood. Today we reaffirm our purpose. Kyle felt the first tremor of the Psi broadcast begin, a hum-like memory being rewritten. Serene stepped forward, projecting her Psi signature. The chamber paused. A hitch, a single beat of collective confusion. "Override," Seren whispered. The seeds in their transport pod detonated not explosively, but introspectively. Across the amphitheater, delegates jolted as wave after wave of unfiltered memory, fear, joy, choice hit their neural cores. Kyle activated the broadcast amplifier. Solus stepped into the center and lifted her arms. Her voice wasn't a sound. It was a story. It poured into every mind, present her childhood as Seren, the severing, the exile, the rediscovery of thought, the yearning to be whole, the right to say no, all wrapped in Kale's stubborn humanity, coded into every molecular note of the signal. The Psi Council's lattice cracked. Cal saw Court's face contort, not in rage, but in disbelief. His own Psi commands were being refused. He raised his arm to unleash a neural lockdown, and Solus was there. She didn't touch him. She just looked. And in that moment, Kale saw what terrified Court most. Not rebellion, not Seren, but Solus, a being born from stolen memories, loved into sentience, and now standing in full agency. The chamber buckled. Delegates stood, minds reawakening. Not violently, but with dignity. The control lattice failed, and Verulam Prime opened its eyes. The days after the grid collapse passed like waking up from a long sleep, where every breath tasted fresher but unfamiliar. The Devarian capital, once a beacon of enforced harmony, now pulsed with an awkward, beautiful chaos. People began talking, openly, not through the lattice, not with pre-approved Psi phrases and emotionally synchronized etiquette, but with messy, stumbling words, questions, disagreements, laughter that wasn't echoed from a dozen minds at once. Kyle stood on a balcony in the central district, watching as delegates emerged from the Psi Congress Hall, blinking and unsure as if light had changed meaning. Seren joined him, carrying 2 mugs of a bitter Devarian brew that could probably strip paint. She handed him one without a word. They sipped in silence. "You did it," Cal said eventually. She snorted. "We did." Solus did. He looked out again. "They're free." "Yes," she said. "Now comes the hard part." Down below, a group of children were drawing with chalk, real chalk, not sci simulation. One sketched a figure with wings. Soulless, Kyle pointed. You seeing that Saren smiled, and for the first time it wasn't tinged with weight. Soulless had changed again. After the signal, she'd gone still, resting perhaps or recalibrating. Now she hovered less often and walked more. Her humanoid form had solidified into something elegant, neither wholly divariant nor human, but a synthesis. She spoke now, not in words, but in gently modulated psi tones that even unlinked minds could feel. And when she looked at you, she didn't peer into your thoughts. She asked to be let in, consent, choice, two concepts once foreign to Devarian civilization, now on the lips of every broadcaster. Meanwhile, the Psi Council had disbanded in a flurry of resignation announcements, confessions, and strangely apologies. Court's death had shocked even his allies, though few mourned. A statue of him had been quietly taken down and replaced with a flowering tree. Seren refused the throne, officially, publicly. I won't rule minds, she had said in her final broadcast, but I will teach. And so she proposed a new institution, the Academy of Open Thought, located at the edge of known space, a place for ESI scientists, dissidents, exiles, and thinkers from all species to research sci-tech ethically, freely. Cal had not expected to be offered a seat on the founding board, but when Seren handed him the offer chip, she didn't ask. She just looked at him like she had that day on Iridex 4, so he said yes. Now, as they prepared to leave the capital, Kale stood in the docking bay where it had all begun. You ever think we'd make it out? He asked Solus, who floated beside a container of freshly grown psi seeds. She replied with a gentle pulse that translated loosely as, we were never meant to stay hidden forever. Saren approached, adjusting the strap of her travel gear. They've already sent inquiries from 6 species about joining the Academy. Some of them aren't even psi-capable. Kyle blinked. How's that supposed to work? They don't want control, she said. They want to understand. A pause. Then Solus drifted between them and nudged their joined hands. Seren looked down, a smirk teasing her lips. That subtle Kale didn't pull away. She's not wrong. They stood like that, fingers brushing lives, entwining not from necessity, but desire. Later, as the shuttle departed Virellum Prime's orbit, Kel looked back one last time. Think they'll be okay? Saren exhaled. They'll stumble, maybe fall, but now they get to choose their own future. In the distance, Iridex 4 shimmered on the edge of the charts, a place outside time. Soon it would be the site of something new, a home for the unshackled, for beings like Solus, for thinkers like Kale, and for dreamers like Seren, who once fractured herself to save what mattered most. The return to Iridex 4 wasn't just a homecoming, it was a transformation. Kael stood at the main viewport of the Academy's construction bay, watching fractal architecture unfold in real time. Psi-reactive spires rose like plant growth on fast-forward fed, not by machines but by intention. Every component responded to conscious input walls that resonated to emotional tone halls, that widened in response to anxiety meditation domes that could harmonize divergent frequencies. He sipped his 4th cup of stimulant in as many hours. This place is either going to be the future of neuroscience or haunted by extremely polite architecture. Seren, reviewing a Psi-Core blueprint nearby, didn't look up. Both, if we're lucky. They had built quickly, faster than Kale thought possible. The old outpost had blossomed into a nexus of inquiry labs, living quarters, a central amphitheater, and Psi gardens designed by both human and Devarian aesthetics. There was even a tea room added by special request from the Thulean representative, who claimed all cognitive breakthroughs began with leaf-infused introspection. Students were arriving daily, some psi-gifted, others merely curious. One had come from as far as the Qatari expanse blind, but with a neural resonance so strong she'd taught the seedling AI how to dream. Cal found himself fielding lecture requests he hadn't delivered since Earth exiled him. And Solus, well, Solus had thrived. She no longer hovered constantly. Now she walked, taught, learned. Her form remained fluid, occasionally adorned with luminous veins that pulsed in time with nearby emotions. She preferred children's questions, called them pure inquiries. Kyle caught her once mid-conversation with a human boy who asked why time didn't taste like blueberries. Her Sanai reply nearly caused a group meditation hall to flicker into astral mode. He'd never been prouder. One evening, while reviewing lattice coupling protocols in the archive dome, Seren joined him barefoot, dressed down in worn transit clothes, her hair loose. "You missed dinner," she said. "Was working on the fractal feedback delay." She leaned beside him close enough to feel. "You always say that, but I know you skipped it because you didn't want to deal with the council from Rhinal Tess asking about psi taxonomies again. Those people asked if emotions could be taxed." Seren laughed. "In fairness, they are economists." Kale turned to her. She was tired, yes, but there was a lightness to her now. The kind that comes only after surviving yourself. He hesitated, then said it. "I was thinking, maybe I don't go back to Earth." She tilted her head. "Was that on the table? I mean, technically. I was exiled. I could petition for reintegration." Seren's gaze softened. "And do you want that?" Kale stared at the glowing psionic tapestry unfurling across the ceiling above them, a visual rendering of ongoing thought connections in the academy. "No," he said. "Not anymore." She stepped in front of him, took his hand. "You found your place?" He smiled. "No, I found my people." Their foreheads touched Devarian style. Not a kiss. Not quite. But it meant something. They stood there, two scientists turned rebels, watching a new world grow around them. Outside, Solus sketched symbols into the psi sand of the meditation garden. "Not for show, for memory," Kyle whispered. "She remembers everything, doesn't she?" Saren nodded, "and she forgives." Kyle squeezed her hand. "Then maybe we're going to be all right." And in the ever-shifting sky of Iridex, three minds, once fractured, once hidden, once lost, came together not in control but in trust. The academy hummed around them, alive. There was no formal ceremony, no podium, no anthem. The Academy of Open Thought officially began one morning with a simple phrase. Solus stood at the central atrium, now a blossoming convergence garden, where thought and biology interlaced and projected a single psi tone that translated loosely as "begin." And just like that, classes started. Students filed in humanoid crystalline aquatic, some wrapped in psi barriers to breathe in the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Most of them came to learn. A few came to argue, and some came to remember, to reclaim fragments of self left buried beneath imposed unity. Kale's lecture on neural rewilding and bioethical sci-tech ran twice over capacity, which was flattering until someone tried to record him without consent. The academy's walls responded by gently nudging the offending student out of the room, like a breeze carrying away bad manners. Later in the botanical wing, a pair of Thulaxi twins debated whether memories encoded in pollen still carried emotional weight. Solus watched, beaming. Meanwhile, Seren found herself the subject of more than one whispered rumor. Some still called her the Shattered Queen, others the Mind That Bled. But she ignored the titles. Instead, she spent hours in the primary chamber, working with refugees from Sci-Oppressed systems, helping them rebuild neural scaffolding that had been damaged by decades of indoctrination. One child, unable to speak after years in a neural reformatting commune, drew a spiral in Seren's palm. She pressed her forehead gently to his. He giggled, his first sound in months. Cal, observing from afar, felt something shift inside him. A realization. This place wasn't just a school. It was a cure. One evening, the three of them, Cal, Seren, Solus, gathered on the North Terrace to review feedback from the first cycle. The stars overhead shimmered with Iridex's usual surreal clarity constellations, dancing just enough to be noticed. Attendance tripled, Cal said, scrolling through data. Apparently, biological consciousness and romantic rebellion is a hit. "I told you that title would sell," Seren replied. Solus pulsed amused tones that translated into something approximating human mating rituals remained the galaxy's weirdest case study. They laughed, then sat in silence. Cal eventually said, "You think we did enough?" Seren tilted her head. "Enough for what? To undo it all? The council. The pain." "No," she said softly, "but we started something better." Solus turned her head toward the sky, toward stars where other psi-links still hummed with silence and secrets. Kyle followed her gaze. "There are more out there, aren't there? Other systems. Other councils." Seren nodded. "And they're watching. Think they'll try to stop us?" They'll try. Kyle stood. Then maybe we should expand sooner than later. Siren raised a brow. You want to franchise the rebellion? I want to give it legs, he said. Biological ones, technological ones, emotional ones. The works. Solus pulsed something long and warm and solemn. Then let's begin again. That night, Kale walked Siren back to her quarters. At the door, she lingered. We should rest, she said, voice soft. Probably. You're terrible at sleeping. Only when I'm excited. She smiled that rare, real smile. What excites you right now? He leaned in close enough for heartbeat resonance. You. And this time there was a kiss. No fanfare. No sigh halo. Just lips and truth and the quiet, insistent promise of something honest. Solus drifted by the window, quietly folding her wings around the stars. Tomorrow the galaxy would wake to whispers of a new mind wave spreading from Iridex 4. A ripple of liberated thought. But tonight was for small miracles. Kel woke to the scent of something gently citrus iridex blossom, metabolically engineered to release calming neurochems in the early light. The plant curled its leaves politely as he sat up. The sheets beside him were empty, but warm. He found Siren on the eastern overlook, dressed in an oversized tunic hair, wild from sleep, sipping tea synthesized from seven-star creeper root. Her expression was unreadable, not tense, not worried. Listening. You're up early, he murmured. I never really slept, she said. Not in the way you mean. He joined her, wrapping a soft cloak around his shoulders. The lattice outside is changing, she said, pointing. The outer psi field of Iridex, normally smooth and dreamlike, was rippling subtle fluctuations in the ambient frequency. Something big was coming. The detection grid shows 5 long-range scouts, Kale reported. All off-axis. Standard Devarian signature, but older. Possibly independent. Siren's jaw tightened. Old world sympathizers. They'll want to see what's become of their control center. Kale smirked. Hope they packed a lunch. Enlightenment takes time. But Siren didn't laugh. This is a test, she said. They'll try to reassert themselves, reclaim control. Maybe not overtly, but subtly, diplomatically. Kyle stood stretching. Then we do what we do best. Build subvert politely. Solus appeared beside them, having phased through the terrace wall like an afterthought. Her form today was tall and robe-draped, with flickers of neural glyphs dancing along her arms. She looked almost professorly. The scouts bring observation, not war. Her psi tone carried reassurance and something else. Opportunity. By midday, the visitors arrived. 5 ships, gunmetal and crest-marked, docked just outside the crystalline perimeter of the academy. Their delegates were old guard Devarian, elegant stoic, and wrapped in aura weaves designed to project dominance without overt threat. They entered without flourish expressions, passive but calculating. Kale met them with Siren and Solus in the central atrium. No armed guards, no security fields, just tea and open minds. You're not afraid, the lead delegate asked after a long moment. Siren tilted her head. Of conversation, never. They toured the facilities. Solus led them through West's gardens, showing seedlings that responded to individual thought. Cal demonstrated neural pairing simulations that let 2 minds disagree without triggering auto-hostility responses. Something once banned in Devarian education. The delegates watched, took notes, occasionally raised eyebrows. But when they reached the children's wing, a cluster of species learning psi-play through shared storytelling, one delegate broke formation. She knelt beside a child mid-sketch. You're drawing yourself. The child nodded. That's me when I'm scared. And this is me when I'm safe. The delegate looked at Siren. You're teaching them to name their fear to understand it, Siren said. You can't control what you don't know. The moment hung like glass. And then the delegate, old proud, once a lattice enforcer, said we forgot how to be alone with ourselves. Kyle watched the others pause. Not argue, not retreat. Consider. Later, over quiet meal orbs and floral-tuned wine, the visitors remained. They didn't preach. They asked, could we send our own students? Would you allow observers to live here? Could one relearn? Kale glanced at Siren. She nodded once. All are welcome, but no more links without choice. One delegate touched a mind crystal set in their chest. It flickered and dimmed. The gesture was old, a Devarian sign of personal surrender. Solus pulsed gently behind them. It begins. That night, Seren found Kale sketching revised academy blueprints for new visitor housing. He looked up at her, surprised. "You're still awake." "I'm always awake," she replied, settling beside him. They worked in silence for a time. Then she said, "You know, none of this was supposed to happen." Kyle grinned. "None of the good stuff ever is." And Solus, floating above them, wove a psi thread between the stars that whispered, "Let them come. We're ready." The academy changed with every visitor. By its third rotation cycle, Iridex 4's PSI atmosphere thrummed with layered resonance thoughts, not in harmony, but in polyphony. Where once there was echo, now there was chorus. Ideas collided like particles in a neural collider, and out of those collisions came invention. Cal had to install a complaint box. Not because people were unhappy, but because conflict, real, authentic, emotional disagreement, was a new experience for many of the ex-Devarian mind-linked attendees. The first note in the box read in shaky script, "I don't understand why arguing doesn't make us enemies." He pinned it to the wall with pride. Meanwhile, Seren was juggling requests from at least 3 newly liberated Pui nations, all asking for guidance on decentralizing their neural grids without inducing mass existential crisis. She crafted frameworks of gradual desynchronization, carefully layering in elements from Earth's own chaotic democratic models, though she admitted, "Let's skip the political ads." Solus had become a mentor figure, especially among species previously barred from psi learning. Her unique nature, half memory and half miracle, made her the perfect bridge. One lesson involved coaxing emotions into visible light forms. Another had her helping a group of Lyran children develop a game that used feelings instead of tokens. Cal caught her once mid-lesson pretending to be confused just to let a student correct her. He whispered to Seren later, "She's playing them." "She's raising them," Seren corrected, and there was no hiding the fondness in her voice. The day the Terran envoy arrived, the Academy came to a brief halt. A sleek ship stamped with United Systems insignia docked at the outer ring. It had been years since Kale had seen anything from Earth. He braced himself. The delegation was small. 3 officials, 1 scientist, 1 familiar face. Dr. Lena Varesh, his former mentor, the one who'd vouched for him before the exile, the one who hadn't answered his messages after the trial. They greeted with formal nods. No hug, no forgiveness yet. Lena looked around the academy, taking in the living walls and humming psychic air. "You built this with Seren and Solus," Kale said. "And the rest." It wasn't a solo act. She gave him a long look. "Earth PSI laws still hold. What you're doing here would be illegal back home." Kyle didn't flinch. "So don't bring it home. Bring people here." Lena's face softened. "You've changed." "You haven't," Cal replied. "And that's why I still respect you." The Earth team stayed 3 days. They attended lectures, participated in a lattice simulation where Seren illustrated the damage forced unity does to abstract reasoning. Lena sat quietly through most of it. But on the last night, Kale found her in the Psi garden staring at the floating memory seeds. "I ran simulations," she said softly. "This shouldn't work." "But it does," Kale replied. She turned to him. "I'm sorry." "Not enough," he said. "But it's a start." When they left, she pressed a data crystal into his hand. "Not Earth's endorsement," she said, "but maybe a future door." Solus hovered nearby as they departed, trailing a long thread of visible thought behind the Terran ship. Not a tether, a breadcrumb. Later that evening, Kale and Seren watched the horizon from the amphitheater steps. "They're not ready," Seren said, "but some of them are curious. That's how it starts." Kale looked at her. "How we started?" Seren leaned into him. "You think Solus is happy?" Solus, ever the show-off, blinked into view above them and projected a pulse of amusement that translated roughly as, "You two are incredibly inefficient at romantic acknowledgement." They laughed. Loud, open, real laughter. It echoed through the night, and above them the stars of Iridex shimmered like neurons waking from a dream. The expansion began not with conquest but with curiosity. Invitations went out across old trade routes and abandoned psi links. Not declarations, not mandates, just open access to a new kind of learning. Some came eagerly, Others arrived cloaked in suspicion. A few came to sabotage but stayed to understand. The Academy of Open Thought became a gravitational center not of power, but of possibility. Kyle found himself moderating a debate between a human neuroethicist and a crystalline archivist on whether dreams constituted a shared cultural resource. It ended in an experimental sleep state test involving 3 species, 2 volunteers, and 1 accidental engagement. Seren, meanwhile, was asked to mediate peace talks between 2 former lattice-bound regions that had split following the liberation. Her approach was simple. She brought both sides into a shared psi echo chamber and let them feel each other's regrets. Tears did the rest. Solus. Solus had taken to disappearing for days at a time, returning with new symbols etched into her form gifts from distant cultures, minds she'd touched. Each one was a story she carried, a memory passed on. She's becoming more than we made her, Kyle said one night watching her teach a session on Isai empathy that had devolved into interspecies theater. Seren nodded. We didn't make her, we just unlocked her. But not all news was joyful. A message came from the outer sector's fragments of the old Psi Council had coalesced into a splinter group. Their new philosophy, selective relinking, voluntary suppression of self for the sake of peace. They're calling it the Harmonium Kyle, said Tone, edged with unease. They're calling it nostalgia, Seren corrected. Kyle sighed. Think they'll come for us. They'll come for the idea, Seren replied. Because it scares them. And she was right. It began with rumors, ships seen near Iridex space, strange lattice spikes echoing through the folds. Then came a communique, a polite one, an invitation to a summit, held on a floating station rebuilt from a decommissioned lattice hub. Solus intercepted the signal before it reached the broader network. Her psi response was short, danger disguised as courtesy. Still, Seren chose to go, not alone. Kyle would accompany her, and Solus, as always, was already part of the strategy. Before departure, they addressed the Academy. No grand speech, just honesty. We'll always advocate for your right to think freely, Seren said, even if others fear what you might do with that freedom. Kale followed with a grin. If we don't come back, please remember to back up the syllabus, especially the section on ethical rebellion. The students laughed, but the undertone was solemn. They left the next day not as warriors, but as witnesses. As ambassadors of a truth many still couldn't believe. That thought unshackled, uncoerced, unlinked, could thrive without descending into chaos. And as the stars folded around them, Kale looked at Seren. Are you ready for this? She didn't answer right away. Then I'm ready to show them what choice feels like. In the corner, Solus shimmered, and for a heartbeat, Kyle saw something new in her eyes. Resolve. And perhaps sorrow. As if she knew that peace never came without cost. The Harmonium Summit took place aboard the Auralis Spire, a station engineered for psi purity, emotion-dampened corridors, sterile architecture, and geometry, so symmetrical it felt like a reprimand. To Kale, the air itself smelled like someone had tried to sanitize curiosity. Seren walked ahead, flanked by 2 Academy envoys and Solus, whose presence alone bent the psi atmosphere into gentle flux. Every corridor they passed reconfigured slightly, as if the station couldn't decide whether to resist her or beg her to stay. Their arrival was met with practiced civility. Ambassador Trine, a lattice-born traditionalist, whose neural tattoos were visible through his skin, greeted them with a nod that conveyed both tolerance and threat. You've brought the anomaly, he said, eyes resting on Solus. I brought a citizen of Iridex 4, Seren replied. Her designation is Solus. Trine's smile was mirthless. You once knew our unity, that rhythm, that serenity, and now you spread disharmony. Seren's eyes didn't flinch. I spread sovereignty. They were ushered into a round chamber of psionic filtration. Kale was instructed to wear a dampening circlet ostensibly for clarity. He declined with a grin. I prefer messy thoughts. Solus projected a pulse of low-level interference to keep the field honest. No mind tampering would happen on her watch. The discussion began. The Harmonium proposed a reconciliation path, limited voluntary psi links under tight protocol, allowing citizens to return to partial communion. They used words like healing and nostalgia. Seren listened, then asked one question. What happens when someone wishes to leave? Trine hesitated. Kyle saw it then, the bait, a voluntary link with invisible shackles, a system that promised comfort but punished deviation. Choice is not the opposite of peace, Seren said. It is peace. The tension rose. Harmonium delegates attempted to escalate emotionally psionically. That was when Solus stepped forward. She spoke not with psi-pulse but with voice. Clear, resonant, neither human nor Devarian. I remember being split, she said. I remember being told I was safer without myself. Her eyes scanned the room. You do not seek unity, you seek quiet. Not the kind born from healing, the kind born from erasure. Trine opened his mouth, but Solus silenced him with a wave, not forceful, but true. Then she released a signal, small, gentle, targeted, to the harmonium delegates' neural cores. Not control, not influenced. A memory, their own, untouched, raw. A child watching their thoughts be erased. A sibling's name scrubbed from recall. A smile reprogrammed into compliance. One by one they staggered. Not all wept, but none could speak. When it ended, Kale exhaled. Well, that's one way to debate. The summit broke. No agreement. No arrests. But when Seren and Kale returned to Iridex, a message was waiting. 3 of the Harmonium delegates had resigned. 2 had requested entry to the Academy, and the last she had vanished into deep space with nothing but Solace's signal in her memory. Back on Iridex 4, the Academy welcomed them like family. No parades, just warmth. That night, Kale and Seren walked the Eastern Gardens. Solus drifted ahead, drawing light from stars. You did it, Kale said. We did. Do you think it'll last? Seren looked at the sky where the lattice used to hum. Now it shimmered with individual threads, each a mind awake. No, she said. Not perfectly. Kale waited. But maybe it doesn't have to, she continued. Maybe peace isn't a state. It's practice. He nodded, took her hand. Solus turned back and smiled, not with lips, but presence. The revolution was not over. It had begun again. Time passed, not in revolutions or declarations, but in quiet moments stitched between breaths. The Academy of Open Thought expanded its reach, not through conquest or advertisement, but by resonance. One world sent a single student, another a delegation of elders who arrived suspicious and left humbled. The idea wasn't to teach doctrine, it was to ask better questions. Solus remained the heart of the Academy. Her form continued to shift, not with instability, but evolution. Some days she walked with the new arrivals. Other times she meditated at the edge of the known psi field, humming to herself in languages made of emotion and math. Seren no longer carried the weight of a deposed queen. She was a mentor scientist and sometimes gardener. When she touched the soil, the plants grew faster. Not because she commanded it, but because they trusted her. And Kyle finally slept well. He taught yes, and built, and argued with guest philosophers about whether willpower had a molecular signature. But he also held Seren's hand in quiet evenings and traced constellations with students until their questions turned into dreams. Once a child asked him if the galaxy was fixed or breathing. He answered both, just like us. And across the stars the idea spread. That thought could be free. That love could be weird. That unity was a gift when chosen and a curse when enforced. In a universe once carved by control, a new song began to play off-key at times, but alive. If you listened closely, you could hear it. A wing beat, a breath, a laugh shared between minds, no longer tethered, but entwined by choice. You could call it peace, but it was more than that. It was hope.